June 1981. In Madrid,
Rápido, por aquí.
hospitals fill with children who cannot breathe, and nobody can tell their parents why. Within weeks, the government names the killer, ordinary cooking oil, sold on street markets as pure olive oil. It wasn't olive oil, it was the oldest con in food, 5,000 years old. This is how it works. That was 1981, but the lie began far earlier, on the terraced hills of the Levant, 7,000 years ago. Here, farmers first tamed the oleaster, the wild olive, bitter and thorny, and bred it into something generous. The evidence is stone, pressing basins cut into living rock, older than the pyramids by 2,000 years. Follow one harvest. The olives fall to nets, then to the crushing stone, turned all day in its basin. The paste goes into woven baskets, a beam presses down, and the oil runs out, gold, green, alive. Now here is the truth that drives this whole story. Nobody can judge olive oil by looking at it. Wine turns sour and says so. Grain rots and smells. But oil keeps its secrets, politely, for years. And because oil blends invisibly, fresh with old, fine with cheap, every buyer in history has needed faith. Picture the press worker, barefoot on the beam, sweating, in a hurry. Fresh oil waits for no one. Because the clock runs on quality, crushed olives ferment fast, and rancid oil was worthless oil even then. Now come forward to the 7th century BC, to a Philistine city called Ekron, and something entirely new. At Ekron, diggers found over 160 olive presses inside one city, the ancient world's first oil industry. Its estimated output, 250,000 liters a year, minimum. The largest production center known from antiquity. Why so much? Because oil was never just food, it was light, the lamp fuel of the ancient world. It was medicine for skin and stomach, soap before soap existed, and the anointing oil of priests and kings. Press oil, and it presses money. And wherever that kind of money moves, quiet compromises follow close behind. The best oil came from the first pressing, cold and quick. Sellers learned early to blur that line. Second pressings got heat and water, more oil, worse oil. Who was counting? Nobody. Who could tell? Nobody. So the pattern is set early. High value, invisible evidence. The world's first food, truly worth lying about. From these hills, jars of oil went down to the coast and onto the ships of the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians carried the tree itself west, to Cyprus, to Africa, to Spain. And on one island, oil became a kingdom. Crete, 3,500 years ago. In its palaces, storerooms the size of houses built for oil. The Minoans filled clay jars taller than men and shipped oil across the sea. Wealth by the jarful. When writing reaches Greece, it shows up counting oil. The oldest Greek tablets are, in large part, warehouse receipts. And here, the myth begins. Athens, the story goes, won its name when Athena planted the first olive. A beautiful story. But the archaeology is plain. The tree was cultivated millennia before Athens had a name. What Athens truly gave the olive was law. Around 594 BC, the lawmaker Solon made a telling choice. Plutarch records the law. Of everything Athens grew, olive oil alone could be sold abroad. Nothing else whatsoever. Break that law, and the city's own chief magistrate had to curse you in public, or pay 100 drachmas. Why protect oil? Because Athens ran on it. The groves were the treasury, and some trees were sacred. The Morii, sacred olive trees said to descend from Athena's own, were guarded by the state itself, zealously. From those trees came the prize oil of the Panathenaic Games, painted amphorae, each filled to the brim. The scale of it staggers. A winning chariot owner took home 140 of those jars. That is roughly 5,000 liters of sacred oil, a prize worth years of an ordinary man's wages. Athletes trained naked, their skin shining with oil. Afterward, a curved scraper took off oil, dust, and sweat. And stranger still, the scrapings from the bodies of athletes were gathered and sold as medicine. People paid. Greek colonists carried cuttings west, to Sicily, to southern Italy. Everywhere their sails went, the tree went too. And in the oil towns, a quiet question persisted from Ekron's day. Is this jar what the seller claims? Athens' answer was branding. Amphorae painted by the finest workshops. But a label, once trusted, invites the forger. For 5 centuries, the pattern holds. The more sacred and valuable the oil, the sweeter the lie pays. Then the balance of appetite shifts west, to a republic that will drink oil, bathe in it, burn it. Rome is coming, and Rome does not want a jar of oil. Rome wants a river of it. Around 160 BC, a Roman named Cato wrote farming's first surviving handbook, and it is obsessed with oil. Cato tells how to build the press, run the harvest, grade the oil, and to watch the foreman closely. Because by Cato's day, the oil game had moved west to Baetica, the Spanish valley of the Guadalquivir. There, the sun grew olives by the million trees, and one amphora shape ruled the trade. The Dressel 20, a round-bellied jar holding some 70 liters of oil, standardized across the province and painted with its own papers. Those painted inscriptions are the marvel of it. Each jar declared its weight, its district, and its checker's names. 2,000 years ago, olive oil already had a paper trail, and it was painted on the bottle. Why all that bookkeeping? Because Rome was thirsty. Historians estimate something like 20 liters per person per year. For the kitchen, yes, but also for the bathhouse, the lamp, the gymnasium. In Rome, oil was infrastructure. So the Spanish oil came by river, then by sea, then up the Tiber, and the jars piled up. They piled into a hill that still stands in Rome. Monte Testaccio, a mountain of broken oil amphorae, 53 million jars. That is the archaeologists' best estimate for this one hill, Rome's garbage made into monument. The oil money built dynasties. 2 of Rome's most famous emperors, Trajan and Hadrian, came from Baetican families. But inside the empire's own audit trail, the lies wriggled anyway. Galen, the great physician, complained about the blenders. He records merchants cutting fine oil with cheaper stuff, lard included. The inspectors had real work to do. A Roman cookbook attributed to Apicius teaches the trick. Make cheap Spanish oil pass for prized strion with herbs and roots. Then, in 301 AD, the Emperor Diocletian capped the price of nearly everything. Oil listed near the top. The edict survives. The finest oil at 40 denarii the pint, 5 times the ceiling for ordinary wine. Cap a price, and you do not kill greed. you teach it arithmetic. The penalties were death. The blending continued. At the river port, the inspector reads the painted jars, weighing, sampling. He is the system's last mile. He will lose in the long run. The empire will fall, the trade will scatter, and the lie will scatter too. For 1,000 years after Rome, oil went quiet and holy. It anointed kings. It burned as chrism and lamplight. Monasteries kept the old groves alive, and in Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, the olive hills spread wider than ever, and oil became soap. Aleppo, boiled olive oil with laurel 1,000 years ago. Castile's white bars conquered Europe. Small markets, small lies. A village knew its miller, its press, its trees. Fraud stayed local, for now. Then came the machine age, and with it, a flood of brand new oils nobody's grandmother could have named. Cottonseed, above all. For centuries, it was useless waste. After the cotton gin, it piled up in mountains. Crush that waste, and out comes a pale, mild oil, a fraction of olive oil's price, nearly tasteless. And here the story turns, the midpoint, where everything reverses. By now, chemistry has learned to clean oil. Refining, they called it. Neutralize, bleach, deodorize. A rancid, stinking oil goes in, a blank oil comes out. Understand what that means. For the first time in 5,000 years, bad oil could be laundered clean. Refined cottonseed looked like olive oil, poured like it, fried like it, and most tongues could not tell. So, America got the swindle of the century. Bottles labeled Italian olive oil, filled in part with cottonseed. In the 1880s, America's chief chemist, Harvey Wiley, named it plainly. Olive oil was being made with cottonseed. Wiley fought for 20 years. In 1906, the Pure Food and Drugs Act made mislabeling a federal crime. Then the government began seizing shipments, case after case of olive oil cut with cottonseed and corn oils. Meanwhile, the tree itself had crossed another ocean. Spanish missionaries planted California's first grove at San Diego in 1769. Mission oil was honest oil, small, local, watched by the grower. But honesty does not scale. Industry does. By the new century, oil traveled as anonymous liquid in drums and tankers. The jar no longer knew its grove. Standards tried to catch up. America issued official grades in 1948. But grades describe, they do not police. Everywhere, the same lesson held. Once the oil becomes invisible, only the label stands between buyer and lie. Then came the Spain of 1981, where a lying label failed so completely that people began to die. It started like flu. Spring 1981. Madrid families develop coughs and fevers. Then their lungs begin to fail. Doctors first called it atypical pneumonia. Yet it struck entire families at once. Fathers, mothers, grandparents, small children. The clustering was the clue. An infection does not gather around a dinner table, but this sickness did. Field investigators went from kitchen to kitchen. One thing kept surfacing: oil, cheap oil, sold on the streets, sold door to door and at open-air markets in unlabeled jugs, at a discount, to families counting every peseta. In June, the government said it aloud. The killer was oil, sold as olive oil, and it was not. What those families had bought was industrial rapeseed oil, imported for industry, denatured with 2% aniline by law. The aniline was the lock, meant to keep machine oil out of kitchens. Someone calmly picked that lock. At one refinery in Seville, that poisoned oil was cleaned, then blended, poured into plain jugs, and sold. Hundreds died. More than 20,000 were poisoned. Many survivors carry damaged nerves and muscles to this day. And the ones who paid the price were not the rich. They were the families who bought the cheaper jug. The courts took 8 years to reach a verdict. Some men went to prison, many did not. The families fought on. Officially, it is called toxic oil syndrome. Spain remembers it as lo de la colza, that colza business. Hold one question, because the answer is still coming. The aniline was supposed to be removed. What went wrong? Because the scandal changed little that was structural. The bottles went back on the shelves. The world moved on. Spain did act. Street sales of cooking oil were banned outright. But the world's shelves stayed wide open. And the honest growers of Spain wore the blame for years, though the crime was born in a refinery. That is the deepest cost of food fraud. It never lands on the guilty alone. It taxes the innocent twice. And the question Spain asked its laboratories, what exactly is in this bottle, became the whole world's question. The question outgrew Spain fast. The same invisible liquid now circled the planet in 1 billion anonymous bottles. Science was about to fight back. New tests, new laws, panels of trained tongues, and one stubborn journalist. The watchdogs already existed. Back in 1959, the world's olive nations founded the International Olive Council in Madrid. It wrote the grades we still buy today: extra virgin, virgin, and lampante, oil fit only for lamps. By the 1990s, European law made it official. Extra virgin is a lab result. Chemistry plus a panel of trained tasters. That is right. Under the law, human beings must taste the oil. The tongue itself is a legal instrument. Then, in 2007, a New Yorker writer named Tom Muller pulled the thread, and the whole sweater unraveled. Muller reported what the trade whispered. Much of the world's extra virgin was old, doctored, or not olive at all. Then the universities weighed in. In 2010, the UC Davis bought bottles off California store shelves and tested them. Of the imported extra virgin samples, 69% failed the standard. A year later, the follow-up hit 73. Television made it worse. One famous broadcast warned that up to 80% of America's extra virgin fails the grade. No, failing that grade is simply not the same thing as being fake, and that difference matters enormously. Most failing oil was real olive oil, but old, oxidized, or badly made. A failed grade, not a fake. The industry answered with its own tests. In 2024, one adulterated sample out of 158. So which is it? Epidemic of fakes or standards war? The honest answer? It depends what you measure and who's paying. Italy's own scandal showed the strain. In 2015, 7 famous brands were investigated. Virgin sold as extra virgin. The companies produced their own lab certificates. Italy's tests disagreed with Italy's tests. That is how hard proof is. Now, the question we parked in 1981. The aniline was supposed to be refined away. Here's what went wrong. The refining worked and didn't. Heat reacted the aniline with the oil itself, birthing new compounds nobody intended. They're called fatty acid anylides, the smoking gun that scientists found years later inside surviving bottles from the outbreak. The meaning is brutal. The adulteration didn't kill those families. The laundering did. The cover-up chemistry was the killer, and the lesson aged badly. Today, the weapons are better. Chlorophyll for green, carotene for gold, seed oil for body. In 2023, police seized 250,000 liters in one operation. And then, the climate raised the stakes again. Begin in Puglia, the heel of Italy. Some 60 million olive trees, many standing since the Middle Ages. In 2013, a bacterium was found in those groves, Xylella fastidiosa, carried between trees by a sap-sucking insect. It chokes the tree from inside. A third of Puglia's olive trees are dead or dying. 20 million trees. Those groves today are grey skeletons where green cathedrals stood for centuries. And still, the farmers replant anyway. Then the droughts came. In 2022 and 2023, Spain, the world's orchard, harvested barely half its normal crop. Prices did what prices do. At origin, extra virgin doubled. In some Spanish stores, a litre passed 14 euros. And oil became loot. Thieves drained 50,000 litres from one Spanish mill, $500,000 worth. In Greece, 37 tons vanished from a single village cooperative. In Spain, supermarkets began locking their bottles up. Scarcity feeds the fraudsters. Europol's 2023 sweep found doctored oil by the tanker, Lampanta, sold as extra virgin. The new fakes are chemistry. Seed oil dyed with chlorophyll, colored with carotene, green and gold on demand. Now for the defense, the part that pays our opening promise. How to actually buy an honest oil. Rule 1. The harvest date matters more than the slogan. Fresh oil is alive. It never improves with age. Rule 2. Dark glass, sealed cap. Light and air are oil's enemies. A clear bottle is a slow funeral. Rule 3. Price is information. Real extra virgin costs real money. A bargain bottle is a quiet confession. And bury two myths here. The fridge test proves nothing. The UC Davis says so. And green is not a grade, because the tasters who grade oil sip it from blue glasses, blue, so that color cannot lie to them. Now step back to the modern plate. Olive oil is pressed in 58 countries on 5 continents, a 3 million ton sea. Spain still grows nearly half of it, and America, the world's largest importer, still buys mostly on trust. So ends the longest con in food. Not ended, really, ongoing. The lie persists because the value persists. From Ekron's presses to Athena's painted jars, from Testaccio's mountain to a blue-tasting glass. Trust must be verified. The oil itself was never the lie. The lie was always the story poured around it. 5,000 years of it.